EuroSSIG podcast 40 Years of Digital Turbulences from the 1990s to the 2030s. Sandra Hoferichter talks to Wolfgang Kleinwächter, who is a professor emeritus from the University of Aarhus, where he was teaching a master course on internet policy and regulation. He was a director on the ICANN board and involved in most UN processes on internet governance since the beginning of the 1990s. And together we are organizing the European Summer School on Internet Governance since 2006 annually in Meissen. Wolfgang, welcome. One of your previous engagement was your membership in the Global Commission on the Stability in Cyberspace from 2016 to 2020. And today's podcast is exactly dealing about these issues, namely cybersecurity, cybercrime, and cyberwar. Cybersecurity is now a political issue and subject to summit meetings of big powers. How this is related to internet governance?
Yeah, thank you and welcome. Without the internet, no cybercrime. Without the internet, no cyberwar. So, but the tragedy or the sad point is that while the internet was developed with good intentions, there are always bad guys in the world who are looking how to misuse this wonderful opportunity of the internet. And so we did see already in the 1990s viruses and worms which destroyed data or interfered into networks and disrupted communication. So this is the dark side of the internet. And so unfortunately, we have to live with it. And today, I think cybercrime produces billions of dollars, losses of billions of dollars every year. And what we see now around the world is that cyberwar is part of the kinetic wars. And, with drones and killer robots, we see a new generation of wars.
This all started in the 1990s. What is the international reaction of the internet governance community and institutions to it?
In the 1990s, it was the Council of Europe who started the negotiations on an international convention against computer crime. At this time, it was called computer crime. But it was unclear, how to define a computer crime and, what would be the procedures, how to, try to get the bad guys and to bring them to justice. And so there was difficult to find a consensus. This changed after September 11 in the year 2001 when the two planes crashed into the Twin Towers in New York. And it became clear that terrorists, will do a lot of bad things and they will use also the internet to do bad things. And the US was a partner of the negotiations in the Council of Europe. And so within a couple of weeks after the September 11th, there was a compromise then. The governments were ready to compromise and signed a Budapest Convention on Cybercrime. It was not called anymore computer crime, it was called cybercrime. And this was the first international legally binding treaty to fight against cybercrime. The convention has a number of definitions, what is seen as cybercrime. For instance, the interruption of networks, the interruption of communication, so the illegal access to data banks. And so it's a very useful treaty. And, with the help of the treaty, a lot of bad things could be get under control since 2001. But the limiting point is that not every country has signed the convention.
And looking at the WSSIG negotiations, which role played cybersecurity and cybercrime in the WSSIG negotiations?
Yeah, the Western countries proposed in the WSSIG process that everybody signs the Council of Europe Convention, because the Council of Europe, if it has conventions, it can be signed by every country. Not only members of the Council of Europe can sign this convention, but a number of developing countries and also Russia and China were not happy with this proposal, because they said we were not participating in the drafting of the text, and the developing countries said our special interests in developing countries are not reflected in the Budapest Convention. And so the only compromise which could be reached in the WSSIG process were that everybody agreed we need a new global culture on cybersecurity. So that means it was discussed in the WSSIG process, but there was no concrete result. And a number of governments was thinking that it's better to negotiate this outside the multi-stakeholder WSSIG approach and to bring it into a purely intergovernmental body and say initiated negotiations on cybersecurity in the first committee of the United Nations General Assembly. This is a purely intergovernmental body.
Beside these governmental negotiations, security or cybersecurity became also an issue in the IGF community and were subject to multi-stakeholder discussions. Can you say something about this in relation to the government's negotiations?
Yeah, we have here a process which is not directly interlinked, but which goes parallel. So in the IGF, the cybersecurity issue became one of the key issues. And after a couple of years, a best practice forum on cybersecurity was established, which tried to get expertise from the technical community, from civil society, from business, how to fight cybercrime. Because the majority of the networks are managed by the private sector, and bringing education to people how to protect against crime. You need also civil society, you need the academic community, and the technical people understand it better. So cybercrime is on the one hand an issue for multi-stakeholder collaboration. On the other hand, cybercrime and cybersecurity is also related to national security. And that's why governments, was thinking it's better to have it in a purely intergovernmental environment. And so many governments preferred to the first committee of the UN General Assembly to discuss the cybersecurity issues, because if it comes to security and at the end to military security, to national security, then it's mainly the government who has to make the decision. And insofar we have this dual process, the multi-stakeholder discussion in the IGF and the intergovernmental negotiations in the UN.
So you believe there is an element of multi-stakeholder approach also for cybersecurity?
Yeah, certainly. In the United Nations, they created then a so-called group of governmental experts, which drafted a number of principles. We have 11 guiding principles for cybersecurity. And so this became a starting point for how international law should be applied in the internet. And international law is a law which regulates the relation among governments. So it was very natural that if it comes to international law, then it's the governments who have the first priority. But the whole environment for cybersecurity is a multi-stakeholder environment. And so the discussion about cybersecurity also included this conflict we have seen in other places between a multi-stakeholder approach on the one hand, where non-state actors are playing an important role, and a purely governmental approach, the multilateralism, on the other side. And it was an achievement. And after a couple of years, the GGE moved to the open-ended working group where not only 15 individual experts from governments were discussing amongst themselves, but all member states, all 193 member states of the United Nations were part of the open-ended working group, which was established in the year 2020. And in this open-ended working group, non-state actors could participate as observers, but with very limited rights. And it's an ongoing debate in this first committee and the open-ended working group, how far the involvement of non-state actors should go if it comes to cybersecurity.
But let me come back to that 11 principles that you mentioned. I understand these are not legally binding, right?
That's right. Yeah, the 11 principles are voluntary, but some governments wanted to translate these principles into a legally binding convention. In particular, Russia was pushing for it. So the argument of the Western countries was, okay, before we make the 11 principle legally binding, let's look how they work, and they proposed a so-called program of action where countries should report how they implement the 11 guiding principles. And in the light of the reports from the countries, then the Western countries argued that then we can consider to translate this into a legally binding convention. But Russia took then another way and separated the question of cybercrime from cybersecurity, from national cybersecurity. And they proposed a special treaty against cybercrime in the third committee of the United Nations General Assembly. And this was accepted by the majority of UN member states. An ad hoc committee was formed, and within a couple of years, within the third committee and in the ad hoc committee, then a new convention against cybercrime was adopted, which was signed just 2 years ago and is in Hanoi in Vietnam, and is now the so-called Hanoi Convention against cybercrime.
Okay, so were there any other consequences from this governmental activity or from these moves from Russia and China?
Yeah, but I think we have the now two conventions. One is the Budapest Convention, which has around 70, 80 member states, and the new Hanoi Convention, which is signed now by around 70 countries. Only 3 have ratified it. So, but in the negotiations, in particular Western countries, were trying to find a coherence between the two instruments, so that they are not in conflict. So the weakness of the Hanoi Convention is that the cases for cybercrime are very vague defined, and you have not strong safeguards, for instance, for human rights like right to freedom of expression or right to privacy. So that means the Hanoi Convention is the weaker instrument, and the Budapest Convention is the stronger instrument. And let's wait and see how this will go together. But we have a continuation on the debate on national cybersecurity in the first committee. And after 5 years, the discussion in the open-ended working group, the 80th General Assembly last year in December decided to create a new UN body, which is called now the Global Mechanism on Cybersecurity, which has substituted the open-ended working group. So that means the open-ended working group, the OAWG, continues to work, but in a new format and called now the Global Mechanism on Cybersecurity. So, and they are dealing not with cybercrime, which is dealing with criminal gangs, but, with state activities in the cyberspace. And this includes cyber sabotage, cyber espionage, and a lot of these things. And here we have the 11 guiding principles from the year 2015, but a lot of new challenges are arising. And so the work will start in July. 2026 in New York, where we have the first meeting of the global mechanism. They have agreed already on the establishment of a so-called point of contact directory, which can be seen as a red telephone for cyber attacks. And so that you have, every country has now provided a telephone number. That means if a country is attacked by somebody unknown partner, then he can call this number and say, is this an attack or not? Because the question of attribution is very difficult if it comes to cyber attacks. So this is alles work ahead, and we will see how the global mechanism will work in the future.
Yeah, you touched upon it already. These days, there is a lot of mentioning about Cyberwar. What is your take on this? How does a war in the future look like, and what can principles and constitutions that have been agreed in the past help preventing this kind of activity?
Yes, in the past, cyber war was seen as a substitute for a kinetic war. So a lot of people also in our global commission, we expected that a war which brings death and destruction is part of the past, and new wars will be cyber wars with, where you create confusion and where you create chaos. So in another country. So that means there will be no permanent peace among all countries, and some countries will start negative or aggressive acts against other countries, but this will not lead to death and destruction. But we have seen in the wars of the last 4 or 5 years in Ukraine, in Gaza, in Iran, in Somalia and others, is that now we see a new generation of internet-based weapon system emerging, the so-called autonomous weapon systems. So, and with drones and killer robots and autonomous vehicles, autonomous tanks, autonomous planes, so which are used for military conflicts, in military conflicts. So the United Nations has started already 10 years ago, under another convention on conventional weapons, negotiations on a protocol on so-called lethal autonomous weapon system called LAWS. There is also a GTE, a group of governmental experts, which negotiates since more than 10 years to define certain guiding principles for regulation. So, but the big powers are not ready to find any consensus. So neither Russia nor the United States, neither Israel nor China, which are the main powers in providing these new weapon systems, are ready to enter into such a convention. The Pope has already called several times for a ban of autonomous weapon systems, in particular if it comes to weapon systems which are no under human oversight anymore. And just recently, end of May in 2026, the new Pope, Leo XII, has published an encyclica where he is also calling the international community to ban autonomous weapon systems which are not under human control. So time is ripe to do something. We live in dangerous times. And so this is the dark side of the internet, which provides so many big opportunities for everybody, but which opens also the door for all kinds of misuses.
Thank you very much, Wolfgang, for this rather worrisome outlook. Our next podcast will be about digital human rights, privacy and freedom of expression. Stay tuned.
Thank you. Bye-bye.